New Testament. Now, there's all kinds of folks in the church world, Christians, pretty good folks, who say this idea of a propositional nation is a great idea. I mean, that's really an idea that many, many, many people believe is what the United States ought to be, is a propositional nation. And they'll say, look in the New Testament. God has done away with all racial distinctions, all national and ethnic distinctions, all distinctions are all just one big church. And they would say, the church is a propositional institution. We all agree on the same set of doctrines and teachings, and that's what Jesus' church is. One big, unified, propositional concept. Well, I don't know, not so fast. If you go to the book of Acts, you're going to discover a lot of people turn to the book of Acts. Turn to Acts chapter number 2. Now, Acts chapter number 2 is often referred to as the beginning of the New Testament church, and that's just fine. I'm not arguing that point. That's a good point to begin anywhere, I suppose. And this is the day of Pentecost. Many people are going to argue that national distinctions were done away with in the day of Pentecost, when they've been so blurred and done away with that the Holy Spirit has come, and Pentecost has been this great time in which this has all been done away with. But yet, they haven't read the chapter very well. Because in verse number 5, we discovered that all these people that were there, turns out they were all of one people. They were all Judeans. They were all Israelites. And even though they had come to visit in Jerusalem from far off places, that's because they'd been scattered, and this was a bringing together of not of strangers, this was bringing together the family again. Bringing together the family members that had gotten taken away. So it says in verse 5, they were dwelling in Jerusalem, Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. Now it says out of every nation under heaven. That doesn't mean ethnically out of all these other nations. That means because it just said they were all Jews. They were all Judeans. And they moved away. God is bringing them back. Now, it's important to understand that we're dealing with this whole idea that the church somehow is a propositional institution. But that's not the way it ends either. And the nations do not lose their distinction when everything gets fixed up perfect again. So when this final world and its all messed up condition gets all straightened out, Jesus comes back. Turn to Revelation. Let's read a passage or two out of the book of Revelation. When we get to a perfect world and Jesus is returned, He's the king, He's ruling everybody, He's telling everybody what to do, He's got it all organized, and He's got it all straightened out just the way it ought to be. We discover in Revelation 21, guess what? There's not just one super massive nation. There's many nations still. There's still nations. Revelation 21, it tells us this. Talk about the New Jerusalem. I'll read in verse 23 and 24. Revelation 21, starting 23. It says, the city had no need of the sun, neither the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it. And the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations, that plural, you see it there, of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. And the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. So we're going to have nations still. Now you're going to discover and read the whole chapter based on verse 12. You're going to be nations of Israel. But we won't go too far down that road because that'll take us into a different direction. But that's an important point. Now then there are others who say, well, no, wait a minute. Look at St. Paul. St. Paul, you know, he looked at his own heritage. Tell you what, let me read for you out of Philippians. Philippians chapter 3. For those who say, oh, you are totally wrong. We need propositional nations. We need propositional ideas. This whole ethnic stuff that's a rejection. Paul, the apostle, didn't think that way. They're going to say, oh, look at Paul here. They're going to quote perhaps Philippians 3. Philippians 3. Paul, I'm going to read for you in verse 4 and 5. Paul talks about himself and his own ethnicity. He says, though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh he hath whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised the 8th day of the stock of Israel, tribe of Benjamin, Hebrew of the Hebrews, touching the law of Pharisee. So he notes that he's a Hebrew. He notes that he's of Benjamin. He says, I've got a lot I can brag about here, about my ethnicity. And then he goes on in verse 8, and he says, hey, all that stuff I count but dung. Look at verse 8. It's true. Paul says that. He says, I count that all but dung that I may win Christ. Now, we know what dung is. Right? Dung, manure. I count that manure that I might win Christ. Say, looky there. It's of no value whatsoever what tribe you're from, what nation you're from. Paul said it right there. It's no more value than manure. Someone's going to probably point that out to you at some point. What are you going to say? Well, here's what I'll say. I'll say, let's keep it in context. Amen. Paul is making a point. You might call it a point of hyperbole. Hyperbole is a literary term that means you're exaggerating one point to emphasize another. And we do it all the time. We use hyperbole all the time with each other. Paul uses hyperbole. We use it right here. Now, if that was not hyperbole, then we have a problem. Because elsewhere we see that Jesus uses hyperbole. We'll tell you what, before we go to Jesus' hyperbole, let's use Paul's own writings. Now, in another place, Paul in Romans chapter 9, in chapter 9, he says in verse 3 about his own race, his own kin, his own ethnicity. He says, I could wish that myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh. Now, he says, these people are so important to me that I wish I'd rather be cursed from Christ. That's how important my kinsfolk are. Which is it? Are they so important? Well, what we're saying is that this previous passage you're looking at is merely hyperbole. In comparison to the love we have for Christ, everything is dung. Everything is manure. Everything in comparison to our love for Christ. He's trying to point out that we can't gain our salvation by resting easy that I am an Israelite of the tribe of Benjamin. I am of the tribe of Judah, of the tribe of Ephraim. Paul's trying to say that's not all that important compared to Christ. Yeah. Just like Jesus said this. Jesus also uses hyperbole. In Luke chapter 14, consider this passage. Jesus is talking about how much commitment we should have for Him. And in verse 26, Jesus says, if any man come to me, and hate not father, mother, wife, children, brother, and sisters, and his own life also, he can't be my disciple. Oh, if we were to take that without hyperbole and exaggeration, then we would have to conclude that Jesus is saying, it's a good thing I hate my wife so that I can love God. It's a good thing I hate Julie. It's a good thing she hates me. Well, obviously that's ridiculous. So again, we have hyperbole emphasizing not that we really hate our wife or our father or our children, but only in comparison to our intense passion for Jesus Christ. Amen. So, let's keep things in context. And you're going to have to maybe bring this out from time to time when people bring up these kind of passages. So, racial pride and racial loyalty, racial responsibility, ethnic pride, don't believe them when they say that's a bad thing. It's only bad if you say that my racial pride and my racial loyalty, my ethnic duty and my ethnic responsibility is absolutely the most important thing in my life, because it shouldn't be. Your loyalty to Christ comes first. Your loyalty to Christ comes first. All things come after our loyalty and devotion to Jesus Christ.
Amen.
But it's not to say that it's not important. It'd be ridiculous for me to say my love for my wife is not important. Yet Jesus says I should hate her compared to my love for him. Okay. This isn't really all that hard if we just read the Scripture within context and let it explain itself. Now, we could go to some other principles here. I won't read these passages. There's another concept that is probably important as we kind of steer our way back to our concept of answering this question, what is a nation? The Old Testament gives us certain rules about government. And back in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and different places, it gives us some rules about if we've got a country, we've got a nation, who should be our rulers? Well, does it tell us who our rulers ought to be? Now, if we had a propositional nation, then we could assume that in a nation which is governed by only by an idea that we hold in common, we should say, well, the guy that rules us ought to be a fella that can best express and defend our idea. Whatever ethnicity, whatever race, whatever his kinship is, that doesn't matter. It's simply his ability to articulate and defend our idea, whatever our idea is. That's not what the Old Testament says when the Israelites were supposed to pick a ruler. In fact, it tells them flat out in Deuteronomy, flat out, it tells us in chapter 17, it says, I better read it, Deuteronomy 17. It's very clear in Deuteronomy 17, verse 15, who they're going to have for their ruler. It says, Deuteronomy 17:15, thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose, one from among thy brethren. Thou shalt set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. So without getting too complicated, you can see what the word stranger in that case means.
Yeah.
It means somebody who's not your brother, not your kin, not your relation. Somebody who's got a genetic connection to you should be your king, and nope, somebody who's not your king, your kinfolk. Doesn't matter how smart or how bright, how articulate he is, how good of a defender of your ideas he is. Doesn't matter. It says he's got to be one of your brethren. We have that we can put on the table as we think about what a nation is according to what Scripture tells us. Well, let's go back to another area. Now, we started in Leviticus 25. The book of Leviticus, as we read through it, a lot of folks find it pretty boring. And it could be, I suppose, but there are some really useful concepts. And if we go back to verse 10 again, let's touch base with this. Because there's something that's really important here. And this has to do with the land. It has to do with the land. All right? Leviticus 25, starting at verse 8, describes something. It's known as the Jubilee cycle. Now, according to this Bible rule, every 50 years, a special year comes. And it works this way. The land that your family once owned goes back to your family. That little farm, this ranch, this little hacienda, it goes back to the family again. And that means, you know what that really means? It means that if you decide you want to sell your family chunk, you're going to get it back. 50 years from now, every 50 years it goes back to the member of that family. It goes back to that family. You can't really sell anything permanently under this law. You can't buy something permanently. If I buy Chad's farm, and then 22 years from now, the Jubilee comes, guess what? I got to give it back to Chad's family. Whether Chad's alive or not, it's going to go to his son or his son's son or whoever it is. It's going to go back to his family. And what would that mean as the decades and the centuries roll by? What does that mean? Think about that. If the land, imagine that in America. Imagine if in this country, That was the Benson homestead. We homesteaded in 1862, out in the prairie. Our log cabin, raising corn. If over the centuries that kept coming back to whatever Bensons were still alive, no matter who bought it, they had to give it back. Had to. What would that mean if that was universally applied to our nation now, in perpetuity, as the decades and centuries go by? It means that everybody who had moved in and bought something, say Jose from Guadalajara, comes in and buys up a little farm and sets up a nice chicken operation, and then the year of Jubilee comes, he doesn't sell it back to the Bensons. He has to give it back to the Bensons. And Jose from Guadalajara doesn't have much alternative but to go back to Guadalajara. It means that every 50 years, every foreigner who decided to move in, kind of create himself a nice little comfortable spot, he's got to go home again. Amen. That means as the centuries go by, this land, this soil, this geography stays with the original people forever. Forever. As long as they remember to apply this law, it stays forever. But Israelites getting greedy, they didn't do that, did they? I bought Chad's farm. I said, year of Jubilee comes. I don't really want to give it back to Chad. Let's change national laws so I can keep it. Well, what's that mean? It means old Jose can keep his too. All right, so this really is a pretty important concept. Because what it does, it means that the same ethnic group on the same chunk of land is going to occupy that land in perpetuity forever. It actually brings in a concept and a phrase that sometimes is used in the far right today. I don't really like to use it too much because it has a lot of baggage now. But it's a valid biblical concept. It's the phrase blood and soil. Now, blood and soil phraseology goes all the way back to Hitler and the Nazis. Now, they had a correct idea. Well, I don't know if they got it from the Bible, but they did have a correct idea. And it still percolates, that phrase percolates around today. The idea that we got genetic folks who are tied to a particular piece of real estate, and this nation belongs to this genetic bunch of folks. And if we've been following Leviticus 25 in the year of Jubilee, everything will be working out pretty good as the centuries go by. Oh no, we have better idea. I can't fix that, you can't fix that. It's kind of a big problem. So we're just stuck for now, aren't we? Now there's other things we could go into on this concept of property ownership. But let's get back, and with the time we've got, let's go back to the United States and our present situation. People who argue about what the United States ought to be in the future, naturally are going to argue about what we've been in the past. So people who say, well, we're a propositional nation. All you got to do is you got to believe in democracy. Usually that's the word that's thrown out the most often. True, I'm not making that up. If you believe in democracy, that makes you an American in spirit. And if you just get in this country, somehow get here, and say, I believe in democracy, that makes you a true American. In contrast to all these other people out there, this really is, I'm not making this up. I'm talking, there are excellent writers who are very persuasive. This is a very popular idea. It's a persuasive idea. It's a strong intellectual idea. And they say, look, we're a propositional nation. If you believe in democracy, you can be part of our country. You just got to adopt our democratic values. And in fact, we so believe in democracy that we want to spread it all over the world. We want everybody to believe in democracy so they can be sort of like us. And maybe even one day we will be one giant nation. You say, well, that's ridiculous. Not at all. I say ridiculous. You might say, well, that'll never happen. Well, you're probably right, it'll never happen. But there's plenty of people who'd like to see it happen. You've heard of the European Union? Angela Merkel, that liberal, democratic German lady,